All right. Well, good evening or morning, wherever you are. Anybody have any significant life things happen this week? Boring, busy, exciting?
Being busy.
Okay. Yeah, things have calmed down. I was saying earlier, things have calmed down a lot here. I had to work really, really hard to get this change at work, this promotion. I'm very happy about it, but it was taking a tremendous amount of extra effort to get it. So I'll start in about a week and a half, and things are getting calmer and calmer ever since then. Looks like Ellen probably jumped off to handle something with her kid. Okay, so a couple high-level things. In terms of where we are in the program, we're going to spend just a little bit more time on CSS, not very much. And then I want to move into JavaScript pretty rapidly. When we learn JavaScript, we're going to learn the fundamentals of the language, and then we're going to learn how it applies to web development, and then we're going to learn how it applies to server-side development. But first, we're just going to study it as its own thing, as a language, a programming language. Okay. Remind me at some point, maybe I asked this already, and I apologize. At some point, have I already gone over the 5 fundamental items that need to be there for any computer program?
Yes.
Okay. Does anybody remember what those 5 things are? I'm just curious. Or any of them?
Off the top of my head, no.
Okay.
But I feel like that's something that we went over. I might be misremembering though. I'm not sure.
No problem.
Opening.
Go ahead. Say it again, Jonas.
Opening.
I missed the word.
Opening.
Opening. Yeah, the very first statement to be executed.
Yeah.
A start point. Good.
Opening. Exit.
Yep.
Branching.
Good.
Subprogram.
Yep.
And
wow, that's 4 out of 5. Good job.
The 5th one is what's that?
Variables.
Variables. Yes.
That's excellent. Everything all right, Ellen? Good. Okay. All right. Cool. One of the things I just want to note is that what we're studying so far hasn't included any of that. Like, there's nothing like that in HTML or in CSS. So we haven't even gotten to the point where we're talking about program logic and how to create a series of steps that will make decisions for us, right? So we'll get into all that. What did I do that changed the screen? Something changed it so it's looking at our agenda. That's really odd. All right. I don't understand that. All right. So that should change in a moment. All right, good. So Ellen, what I was just letting him know is that we're going to spend just a little bit more time on CSS, but then we're going to very quickly move probably next session or the one immediately after into the fundamentals of JavaScript and start actually writing programs. And we'll be able to pull these 3 technologies together that we've been studying: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. For now, I want to cover a little bit more CSS, not a lot. And I kind of want to explain my strategy here so that we're all like tracking. There are like 2 rough divisions of like type of career that you could at least enter the industry with. One could be called just a pure web developer, and one would be a full stack developer. In my experience, the career longevity factor is better with being a full stack developer, and the amount of money you can make in general is better being a full stack developer. That said, there's a lot of money in just being pure web development. So let me explain what I mean in basic terms. If you're a web developer, what it means generally is that you're going to use the technologies of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, both to create just the web pages, the user interface, but also to create full-blown computer programs, very robust, powerful programs, but they're just going to live in the user's browser, in the client's browser. You'll be writing client-side programs. And depending upon the complexity of the programs you design, it can take a lot of skill. It can pay really well. It's a really smart route to go. The pieces of it that are missing generally are building all the back-end services. And here's some of the things that I mean that are back-end services. One would be creating APIs. This is something that doesn't have a user interface. It's just a service provider of sorts, accessible via the internet. You can send HTTP requests to it and it'll send back responses, but there's no user interface. It's there to be of service to other computer programs. So that's not something you would generally do as a front-end developer. You might transition into it, but it's not considered that front-end developer skill set. The other thing that you're really not going to touch much on if you're quote unquote just a front-end developer, and I don't mean it derogatorily at all. The other thing you're probably not going to touch on much is database design and operation and using databases. And finally, what you're really not going to build is computer programs that aren't going to sit out in the user's browser, server-side computer programs. So what we're learning in this whole program is full stack development, which means that we're going to cover all the fundamentals of each of the areas that I just mentioned. The HTML, CSS, and JavaScript piece, so that you can work in the front end, both designing user interface, styling it, and writing computer programs that will live in the user's browser. But we're also going to cover server-side application development, writing computer programs that will live on a server and other programs will call on them and have them do work. And we're also going to cover database operation. The end result is that you should be able to work across the stack. You should actually be able to create a computer program that has all three elements: a backend database that you can use, a server-side component, and a front-end component. You should be able to work in all three of those. Now, what this means is, as we learn all of these things, you're going to learn enough to be able to be comfortable working in that environment and to be an entry-level developer and be part of a team that works across the whole stack. We're not going to do super deep dives into every single one of those areas. The areas where we will concentrate pretty heavily on are JavaScript development, both for the front end, creating applications that will run in the browser, and for the back end, creating server-side applications. We're going to concentrate pretty heavily on that because that gives you a deep knowledge of a powerful language that can be used in both areas. It's also knowledge that will stand you in good stead if you go to learn another similar language. So I want you to have a deep knowledge of JavaScript. Databases, that's an area where we'll go relatively deep because they're common to any back-end service. Having that knowledge really increases your ability to do more for your client, your employer, and make a lot more money. The areas where you're going to learn pretty much the fundamentals and be able to operate are HTML and CSS. Those are the two areas where you could go really, really, really deep, but we're going to teach you enough to be able to operate comfortably in that area. Now, all of that is just setting you up for how this next 1 or 2 classes are going to go. We could spend the next 5 or 10 classes on HTML, CSS, and JavaScript and how all three work together and go really, really deep on CSS, for example, or really, really deep on HTML. But that's not the program I've put together. So just to set the stage, are there any questions about that? Okay, let me just check something that's happened here online. I think what's going on my Twitch is that I clicked on something I shouldn't. And I'm watching a recording of a different video. Okay, good. That's why I got all confused. All right. So any questions on what I just said?
No.
Okay, good, cool. All right, so here's the remaining pieces we're going to cover on CSS. We're going to discuss the challenges that came about as the type of devices that people use to access the web, started to really get varied. Back in the 90s, when the web was really starting to come into its own, it was just desktops. Mobile devices weren't a thing. And the size and shape of the displays people would use to use the web didn't have a lot of variety. But then came mobile devices and everything changed. Now, the interface you can use can be as small as your Apple Watch to a certain extent, and as large as those big 55-inch monitors people have, and everything in between. And CSS really wasn't designed with those things in mind. So two things came about that we're going to discuss tonight. One is, as they changed, as CSS started to evolve, when they hit version 3, they really started to think with this problem and come up with solutions that were built into the specification for it. The second thing that happened is some people that really love this area of CSS and styling and handling all these wide variety of devices that you might want to access the web with started to put together pre-made solutions that would be very, very valuable to people. What they came up with are called frameworks. Now, I want to clarify the word framework. I've used this word framework before. Does anybody remember a discussion we had about the difference between a library and a framework? And if you don't, that's fine. You may recall anything about that?
I don't.
Okay. We'll go into some detail on this when we start to actually learn JavaScript and when we talk about other programming languages. But the short version is that a library is just a bunch of pre-made code, and more precisely, a collection of available functions. And if you include it in your computer program, then if you want to, you can tell your computer program to use one or more of those pre-built functions. That's what a code library is. It says, I built a bunch of ways to do things. I made some choices in doing so. Here they are in a collection of files. If you want to use those, just put them into your project and then call on the specific function you want. But you don't have to use any of them. You can include the whole library, this collection of pre-made functions, and not do anything with it. That's a library. Just like you'd go and check out a book from a library, you don't have to, but you could. A framework is a different beast. A framework, in its essence, means a pre-built solution that includes everything you need for a full-blown installation of a thing. And that's a very general, so we'll make it a little more concrete, and then we'll talk about CSS. There's a common type of computer program called a web application. Now, a web application means something pretty precise. It means an application where the computing work is done both in the browser and on a server. Now, what's the purpose of a computer? Go back to the first couple of sessions we had. Anybody remember the basic purpose of a computer?
To take in data, change the data, and then output it.
Good, exactly. And you can call that computation, or you can call it handling a workload. There's lots of different terms for it, but this is what computers do. They ingest data or take it in, they process it in some manner, and then they send it on. A web application lets you do that kind of work in both the user's browser and down on a server that you control. That's the definition of a web browser. When you build a that's the definition of a web application. When you build an application like that, there's a lot of things that you kind of need, no matter what the area that you're working in is, whether you're building a computer program to handle retail, or whether you're building a productivity tool to track, when people are going to take vacations, or you're building something for inventory control. Doesn't matter. If you're building that kind of a program, there's things that you care about. Things like creating user accounts, handling password resets, handling routing of requests, like an incoming request to, view the details on a product or whatever, right? And since these are really, really common when you're building any web application, then enterprising people have gone ahead and made, depending upon the language they love, an example web application, a collection of files that actually, this is the important point, when you install it, it's a full-blown computer program, and you can run it and it'll execute. It's got everything it needs to be a fully running computer program. There's no customization to it. It's all generic. It's sitting there ready and waiting for you to do stuff to it, to customize it to the situation you have. But it's I will say there's a phrase, it's a going concern, like it already can operate and execute. Any questions about that concept? Okay, and you're going to find a lot of web application frameworks. We're going to work with several as we go throughout all this training. Now, there is in the CSS world the concept of a framework as well. Now, remember what we said at the beginning of this class today, CSS is not a programming language. So the word framework is a little bit different here. It doesn't mean a full-blown computer program because CSS isn't that. What it means is a collection of pre-made CSS styles and JavaScript code, those two things, they can work together to solve common problems you have in designing web interfaces. It's a pre-made solution to very commonly encountered problems. And it has with it all the tools you might need to handle all these display sizes that are varied, or the ability to easily make a tiny change in your styling and have it ripple out through your entire application and have that be done in an intelligent manner. All the things people ran into problems with or challenges with trying to manage large websites with, that grew increasingly complex, these frameworks seek to solve them. And here's the biggest thing you need to know about frameworks of any sort. When people make them, they are automatically a result of the opinion of the people that made them. They are opinionated. You have to make decisions about how you're going to organize your code, your computer program. In this case of CSS, you have to make decisions about how you're going to lay out the design of a web page and apply styling to it, because there's lots of different ways to do things, as you guys have seen over the last few sessions. So we're going to study one framework tonight called Bootstrap. And then tomorrow we'll look at another one called Tailwind. And I just want you to know what it is we're about to look at. You're looking at someone's opinion. That's all. It's their opinion about how to solve these problems. And once you decide to use it, there's trade-offs. And we'll discuss some of those. There's good and bad to doing so. So without further ado, let's sort of get into some of the material today. And again, as always, interrupt me at any point. First question is, has anybody here used a structure in CSS called a flexbox? Okay.
Yes.
Good, you have. Ellen, can you describe in basic terms what it is, what it's there for? It's okay if you can.
I don't know. I know it's super easy to organize how things are showing on the page.
Yeah, organizing layout on the page. Good, good, excellent. And it is in fact that. It's a way to help you with laying things out. And as you discovered when you were making your bio pages, that can be a bit of a pain, like laying things out and centering things and figuring out how many columns and like where. It's not the easiest thing in the world in CSS. And so when we got to CSS version 3, an attempt to make this easier for people was put into play, and it's called Flexbox. So the first thing we're going to do today is we're actually going to do some coding together. I'll share my screen. I'll go through the same coding you're going to do. And we're going to start to use this Flexbox thing and kind of wrap our wits around what it is and how it works, because you will encounter it fairly often out in the wild. So everybody make sure you've got Visual Studio Code up and running or available, and I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to do what you do. Some of this I already know really well. Some of it will be a little new. It'll be fun. All right, so give yourself a new Visual Studio Code instance. Let's enlargify this and handle some zoom control things. All right, good. We'll check on Twitch. Okay, good. Hello to the chat or to the viewers. If you're there and you want to chat, throw something in. I'll be watching it. All right, so let's just make a folder to do our work in here. So open folder. And I'm going to do this inside my repos. I'm going to make a new folder here and just make one called Flexbox. And open up that folder. If you need me to pause at any point or go over something again, just stop me and I'll do so. So let's just give ourselves a file in here, index.html. And here we're going to start experimenting with Flexbox. Let me check the settings on chat to make sure that it's set properly. Let's see. Good. Followers only is off. Subscribers only is off. All right, good. Excellent. Okay. So first, because you don't have to do it that often, I just want to get us comfortable with it. Let's just start laying out the skeleton of a basic HTML page. What's the first thing that goes to the top of the HTML page?
Doc type.
Good. All right, and what document type are we creating?
HTML5.
HTML.
Excellent. All right. All right. What's the top level tag?
HTML.
Good. And then what are the two child tags that we put in?
Head and body.
Good. All right. Get the zoom control stuff. Okay. So a couple of things in here. I realize there's something I've been meaning to talk to you about for a while and I haven't covered in great detail. I'm not going to do a super big detour on it, but we might talk about it in more detail later on. Has anybody heard of the term character encoding?
Can you repeat?
Absolutely. Has anyone heard of the term character encoding?
I have, I think.
What does that mean in your
Character encoding. So I think it has to do with the way that certain browsers display like the characters on the screen, but I'm not entirely too sure.
You're on the right track, actually. When you're thinking about this in terms of the web, that has a lot to do with it, how you might display things on the screen. But from the basics of a computer, here's what it means. A system where binary codes equal individual characters from a language. Now, why does this matter? Well, we discussed early on how to do math in a computer. But that's pretty straightforward because you can do binary math. But how do you work with characters? This was a problem that the very first designers of computers had to confront. And so what they came up with is, well, let's make a table. And this table, oh, it made a table. Look at that. It's not what I meant to do. The table will have one column. Ooh, look at that. Probably shouldn't be doing this inside here because it's going to get mad at me. And then with columns, and they are code. And then the next one is character. An example would be like this. Let's go over here. And we could just say the code 65 is the character A. And the code 66 is the character B, and so on and so forth all the way through. Now, I'm showing you these in decimal, but we can convert those to binary really easily. So this is a system that someone had to come up with very early on. How do we represent alphanumeric characters in a computer? Does anybody know the first most or commonly accepted system for this in computers?
ASCII, isn't it?
Yes, ASCII. So let's look at ASCII for a second. Anybody know what it stands for?
American Standardized.
American
I don't know.
American, well, maybe I should
Standard
spell
Code
it.
for Information Interchange.
Exactly, American Standard Code for Information Interchange. It sounds real cool. And let's look at what it looks like. This is showing several different pieces of information. The ones I want you to pay attention to are the, I want binary. Oh, no, decimal's fine because we can convert it. The decimal column and the character column. I want you to look starting around, 65. Notice that there's a separate unique code, 65, for a capital A. Notice there's a separate code, 97, for a lowercase a. It's a different thing. You and I, when we read text, if something's capitalized or not capitalized, we can tell what we mean. To a computer, you have to designate them as separate things. So this little table you see here shows the actual character, a null character, some other stuff that I want to get into in a bunch of detail, but all these common symbols, the numbers 0 through 9 for the decimal system, punctuation symbols, and the capital letters and lowercase letters, and a couple extras. This system right here was used all around the world for a very long time, and it is a character encoding system. The code is whatever you see here in decimal or hexadecimal or octal. They all mean the same thing. They all equate to the same exact binary number. You can convert them down. So that's what a character encoding system is. Any questions so far? Well, that's great and all, but not if your language isn't English and there's only 128 different symbols that are in it. So then they expanded a little bit and they went, well, let's add a bunch more. And they have all these symbols that let us pull in at least some of the common characters from other languages, but they still use predominantly Indo-European or Arabic letters. So what was their solution? Anybody know what they did after that?
They created the Unicode.
Yeah. Unicode, a computing standard for consistent encoding symbols. Came out in 91. It's just a table. But it encompasses a lot more characters. A lot more. And there are different versions of it. Okay. Let's see, list of Unicode characters. Wikipedia has it. So we're already up to version 14. We've got 150,000 characters we're keeping track of. A script is essentially like a language, a collection of letters and symbols. And we cover a lot of them from all around the world. So when you see the letters UTF, that's a specific character encoding format. That's what that means. There's several different versions of them. You don't need to get too nerdy about this at the beginning of your career. You're going to occasionally encounter some really weird nuances of exactly how this is done and the different versions, but you can learn about that when you encounter it. The big takeaway is that these different various versions that are out there need to be specified so that any computer that tries to take in your website files knows how to process character data. That's the big takeaway. Any questions? All right. So let's take away all this nerdy stuff about character encoding. In our head, we're going to put some information about what character set to use. It's a meta tag, and it's got an attribute. You can set lots of meta attributes. In this case, it's called the character set. And notice on the right there, what Visual Studio Code is telling me. This attribute declares the page's character encoding. And there's a lot of other nerdy stuff. Don't get into all that now. What character set we want? Well, UTF-8 is the most common accepted around the world. So let's do that. I want you to understand what it is and why it's there. Again, there's a much deeper dive you can do into that, but it's enough to know that there are different systems for different languages and different levels of complexity. All right, what else might we put inside our head?
Title.
Let's put one of those. And this can be called working with Flexbox. And obviously I want you guys following along with everything I'm doing. All right, now we're gonna come back here because we are gonna put, and we'll make it empty for right now, we're gonna put our style right inside here. I'm not gonna do a separate page for this. I want you to be able to see the direct relationship. So now inside the body, let's give ourselves some content to work with, okay? I want a div in here. And all I'm gonna do is have 3 divs inside it. So give yourself 3 divs inside it, all 3 on this same sibling level. And inside one, you put content 1, content 2, content 3. We want to have something on the page that we're going to style and work with. Now, if you haven't already installed it, I want you to install this thing and let you launch this with 1 keystroke. I can put Alt-B and it automatically just calls up my web page. I want you to have that, okay? Who doesn't have that installed? Something like that. Good. All right, so now let's go and look at styling this thing, okay? The first thing we need to do is designate the outer or parent div as a container for everything inside it that we're going to control using this Flexbox thing. So we're going to give it a container, a class. We're going to call it Flex Container. And now each of these divs inside it, we want to have also some individual control over. So we want classes for them, but each one is going to have its own class. So this is going to be content 1 is its class. I think you can see where I'm going with here. Content 2. Content 3. Now, if you render this with Alt-B, it still looks pretty boring. They're stacked on top of each other. Okay. So I'm going to put in place the flex box and we're going to talk about what it's doing. So up in our style here, let's start styling this flex container. That's our outer wrapper. And here's our styling rules for it. We're going to set its width at 80% of whatever the screen is. We're going to set a minimum height on it at 300 pixels. And here's the important part. We're going to use a display setting built into CSS3 called Flex. And you can see on the right, the element generates a principal flex container box, which we'll talk about, and establishes a flex formatting context. And let's put a border around the container so we can see what's going on inside it. It'll be 1 pixel thick. It'll be a solid. And the color on it will be, let's see. There we go. Some gray. I'm going to wait till everybody gets caught up. Let's see where we're at right now. What happens to the flex container? Well, we have a big box. And now we'll have flexible positioning inside it. A flexible box, hence the name. So let's start to get some styling rules on what we have inside the box. We can do that by setting another rule here. And we'll go to flex container. And then the div that is a child of it. That's all 3 of ours. So for all 3, here's what we're going to do. We're going to set a background on it, which will help us easily see what size it is. And oh, I wrote this down. So DB DF E5. It's a light gray. And the most important part here is the flex. Which we'll get into like how this works. This is going to be set to 1. And this will be equal spacing for all 3, for anything inside the container, essentially. So let's see what that does. Now you should be here. We now have 3 equal width divs. Just for the heck of it, let's put a border around them so we can kind of see how big they are. Got my semicolon. And here we'll do 1 pix. And it'll be dashed. And I want red, just to make it really stand out. And let's see what that looks like. And now you can see these 3 equal spaced boxes inside the container. Now, I'm interested in what happens as we make this thing larger and smaller. So look what happens there. CSS3 automatically will keep that ratio for us. And we didn't have to do very much to get that kind of functionality. And it's because of this new attribute called flex. Any questions so far? All right, now we're gonna get a little bit nerdy here. We'll go slow. I want everyone to follow this. I don't work with these that often, so I'm following along too. I really like the CSS frameworks. They handle a lot of things for you. So let's look at a little bit material on this and see if we can start to follow along what's going on inside these containers. Okay. I'm going to pull over right here some info about the Flex container. So we've made a Flex box. You can see the Flex box in action right here. You can see the code for our Flex box where we've made a container on the outside, and it has a display style of Flex. And we've set some styling rules for what's inside it, the divs inside it, just so we can kind of see how they're laid out, what they look like, and how they're going to be controlled. We'll look at this Flex property a bit more. So the Flex box that we have right here inside the container consists of Flex containers, there's our container, and Flex items. We happen to have 3 items inside here, okay? So how do you make some kind of element into a container? You give it that display property of either Flex or inline Flex. The difference is whether it'll treat what's inside it with block level styling or inline styling. Does anybody remember the difference between those 2 things?
Yeah, doesn't block level like make everything on a new line and its own thing, and inline block will just start inside of I don't know how to word it.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Block level, you're stacking things on top of each other, like blocks. Inline, you're setting new elements one after the other on the same line. In general, okay? There's so much nuance to CSS. It's incredible. But that's a nice generality of it, okay? So there's 2 different ways that you can arrange things inside this container. But the big thing to start with is we have a Flex container. You can see it right here. And we're going to control how we lay things out inside it. This is our sandbox, if you will. Now, part of the reason this is important to understand is that when you move over to the other frameworks, when you move over to frameworks like Bootstrap and like Tailwind, they make use of this, but they add a lot of things onto it. But underneath, some of the concepts are the same. And so it's important to understand what's built into CSS, this Flex box, and then look at the frameworks that make use of it and add on to it, because a lot of the concepts are still there. So we have a Flex container, and child elements automatically become Flex items, what are called Flex items. So you have a Flex container, and anything inside that is a Flex item. And they get laid out according to whatever model we chose, Flex or inline Flex. Now, this is another note. We don't need to dive into that super deeply. Float, clear, and vertical line don't mean anything. Think of this container in here, this Flex container, as, like I said, a little playground where you have really tight control over what happens. What that means is that some of the other things you're going to do outside of it don't get used inside. So how do we arrange things? How do we position things inside here? The first thing to think of is what's called a flex line, okay? A flex line can be horizontal or vertical. And so you're going to position things along that line. Right now, we're looking at a horizontal arrangement, okay? But there is a property inside this container that's called flex direction. Normally, you have one line of items inside this container, and the orientation of them is controlled by this flex direction. It's the inline axis of the current writing mode. So what does this direction mean? All right, so we have a flex container. In our code, that is this div right here. That's our flex container. Inside it, we have flex items. We have 3 of them. These 3 divs are our flex items. Let's expand a little bit and look at how we control the flow or the positioning inside that, okay? In the standard box model, elements are normally displayed in the order they appear in the underlying HTML. And that's all you get. That's what we have right now. We have these 3 elements, these 3 divs. And in our text file, our markup file, we have one after the other after the other. But you can change things up inside this container and not be limited to how you lay down those divs or those elements in your code, because a flex layout lets you control the direction inside the container. So you can lay out your elements left, right, down, up. How do you decide that? By setting a flex direction property. Now, we didn't set a flex direction property, but we could have. In our container, we could put a flex direction property. Notice it says specifies how flex items are placed in the flex container by setting the direction of the flex container's main axis. We're going to set it, and it'll be set to row. The flex container's main axis is the same orientation as the inline axis of the current writing mode. Well, I am writing, because I haven't done anything weird to change my writing, from left to right. So if I set this to row and then go back and refresh, nothing changes. And the reason for it is the default flex direction property value is row, because that's the most common way you're going to lay things out. That's the same as our current writing mode, our text direction. In other words, it's left to right in the English language. Let's change things around a little bit here. Let's do a flow reverse. I want everyone to set their flex direction here. I think I'm doing that wrong. Oh yeah, flex direction. Did I type that right? Row reverse. That's right. There it is. Same as row, except the main start and main end directions are swapped. Let's go here and click refresh and see what happens. And notice content 1, then content 2, then content 3. So you can switch things up. Now, you have taken the way you wrote the HTML, 1, then 2, then 3, and you have utterly changed it. You swapped it. Any questions so far? All right. So let's look at doing columns instead of rows. Our flex direction, we want it to be column. Let's change flex direction to column. And notice the main axis is the same orientation as the block axis, stacked on top of each other. Let's go and refresh. Now we've got 1 on top of 2 on top of 3. You start to get the idea of the flexible box. With a tiny code change, you can utterly change your layout. Any questions so far? All right, so how do you think we get them to go the other way?
Column reverse.
There we go. Let's do that. It should be 3, 2, 1. There it is. Okay, now there's a lot more nuance. We're only going to go a little ways into this because frankly, what you get from the frameworks Bootstrap and Tailwind is so much more powerful that most people are using that, but you will encounter this flex box. And when you see it, I want you to have an understanding of at least some of the fundamental concepts of what they're doing and why they're doing it. So let's go a little farther deep into this, right? The most important aspect of the flex layout is the ability of these flex items. Remember, those are the things inside the container to alter their width or height to fill the available space. Now, we have been using this flex property. We're saying display is flex. There's more aspects to it. There's flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis. And this is the part that the designers of CSS got really smart about. They said, well, we've got all these weird varying sizes of screen that are out there. What are we going to do about this? How are we going to make it so that people don't have to like think ahead of time about all the weird different versions of sizes of screen that are out there and put a bunch of complex code to change their layout for every single possible variety? It's insane. It's too much to account for. And then new devices come on the market and it's all over. So this is what this looks like. When we say display flex, there's defaults for flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis. But we can actually delve into these and change them a little bit. So let's look at this example here. Okay. Remember how we put these classes on here? I put content 1. Let's change our code a little bit. I'm going to move this out of the way and we'll come back to it. Again, I want to go real slow. Make sure everybody's tracking. We have our container. And what we're going to do now is set some rules for how to, on the fly, adjust the amount of space that each of these 3 take up. So our container still is a width of 80% and 300 pixels high. Okay. It still uses the flex display setting that makes it a flex box. Okay. Let's take away this flex direction because we're not doing columns. I want to keep that border just because it helps us see everything that's going on. But now in the flex container, all the parent divs, now we're going to change things a little bit. We're not going to style all of the divs equally. We're going to set individual rules for each one. So let's take away all this styling. And all we're going to put in here is, oh, wait, I wanted my background. Control Z. Keep your background. Okay. I want a padding around each one of 10 pixels. Okay, good. If we need to put a border around it to see it better, we will. But now let's start to set some different rules for these three classes we have down here, content 1, 2, and 3. What I want is the two outer ones, content 1 and content 3, to have the same style rules. So we'll do dot content 1 and dot content 2, and then we'll set our rules.
1 and 2 or 1 and 3?
Good catch. Thank you. This is going to be, remember this flex, and we'll expand on what it is. This is shorthand for 3 different properties, but there's some built-in defaults. So we're going to do a flex of 1 on this. And then we're going to do flex of 2 on the final one. So that's dot content 2. And its style is going to be a flex setting of 2. And these are just built-in defaults for those 3 factors: grow, shrink, and basis. Let's see what that looks like. I want to put the borders around. I'm going to see them a little more easily. Let's put our border back on any of the divs inside the flex container. So I think I chose a red border, right? So it's dashed. It was 1 pixel. It was dashed. And it was red. Okay. Let's put that back. I'll leave that there for a second. Let's refresh. Okay, good. So now we can see them. And let's see what happens as this gets larger and smaller. And it keeps that ratio for us of 225% and a 50%. You see that? Okay, good. All right, now, sorry. There's a bunch more control you can do in here. You can justify the content inside it. You can align left, align right. I don't want to go too deep into this because what you're starting to see here with this column layout and the ability to, depending upon the change in the size of the display, on the fly, adjust how much space the individual elements take. This is what you're going to see done super effectively in Bootstrap and in Tailwind. So that's as much as I want to cover a Flexbox. Part of the reason I wanted to show you this is to let you know that, one, the developers of this specification called CSS saw the need for this and came out with a built-in solution. That's Flexbox. And then independent people out in the world wanted a more robust solution. And they came up with other frameworks. Now, the first one we're going to cover is Bootstrap. Does anybody know who created Bootstrap? Twitter. Twitter created it. Yeah, they created it for their own internal use because they, one, they had the money to do it. 2, they needed it because there's this rapid proliferation of different size displays, and they wanted to have a really good, pleasant experience for anybody, no matter how big or small their device was going to be. And once they realized that what they built was useful to other people, they went, you know what? Let's just give it to the world. And they made it open source. And that's where Bootstrap came about. From Twitter. All right, it's 9 o'clock. We've gone for an hour. I want to take a quick break, okay? Let's talk about a couple scheduling things here. Let me stop sharing. All right, so let's see. Here's the challenge I have, and I want to just talk through it with you folks because you are my students. Very often, we rent out a big portion of our house, as I probably mentioned. And my office is on that floor. And I talk loudly, as my wife has pointed out many times, rightfully so. So we got a bit of a challenge with me having classes that go late and not upsetting our guests that are paying good money to stay here. What I want to propose is going from 7 Pacific to 8:30. But I know that means impact on many of you. And I'll do whatever we need to do to make this thing work. So tell me, if we started an hour earlier, what does that do that's negative for any of you?
That would be okay for me if we did, for the most part. I started a job a few weeks back,
Oh
and
yeah, that's right.
I'm on call once, like this is my on-call week, but like once out of every like 6 or 7 weeks,
Okay.
I'm on call until 11 my time, which that would be 10 my time, 7 would be. So there would be a slight chance that maybe
You
an
get called
hour
in or
after we
something?
started that I have to turn over here and do some work.
Mhm.
So
Okay.
it won't affect me that much, so it'll be fine.
Okay. Now, Ellen, you've got a young kid. How do you do with that?
Well, that's gonna be like for today. If she wants to sleep, no problem. If she doesn't, I'll just go upstairs and put her back in her bed.
Okay. You'll be okay with it?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, Sudesh, you get up at the crack of forever. Is an hour earlier going to be a horrible heartbreak?
I know. No,
Okay.
I
Jonas?
just need to, yeah, get early.
Okay. Jonas?
It's okay.
All right. And Alexandra?
Yeah, it works for me.
Okay, good. All right. We don't have to do that this week, this change. Okay. We don't have any guests this week, and I've got things already set up to be able to just do it the same. Thank you for your understanding on it. This is just a work in progress. And you guys are my priority. The thing I didn't want to have to do is have them at the usual time, but do them upstairs where I don't have any of the same setup at all, in terms of dual monitors and all that kind of stuff. So, all right, let's go ahead and take a quick break. I just want to take 7 minutes, get up and walk around, and then we'll come back at about 10 minutes after the hour. And then we'll dig into the first parts of Bootstrap and see some of the principles underneath it. And then what I'm going to have you guys do is a little bit of work to try to take your remember your bio pages you made, your landing pages. I want you to restyle those with the Bootstrap system. So I want to get you guys to the point where you feel like you can embark on that redesign. It's probably about a 30-minute project to redesign it, maybe an hour. So that's what we're doing. Any questions from anybody before we take a quick break? All right, let me get a timer up here on the screen. And I got to share my screen again. Egg timer. All right, so there's 7 minutes, and I will share my screen, and I'll see you all shortly. All right, welcome back. Okay. Let's see how we're doing. Sudesh, I see you. Jason, you there? I know you had to step away for a second. Good. Alan, Jonas, Alexander, I see you all. All right. I'm sure Jason will return shortly.
Yeah, I'm here. You go
Oh,
ahead.
good. Excellent. Okay, cool. So let's go and talk about this whole bootstrap thing. Now, I had the whole discussion at the beginning of tonight's class about the difference between a framework and a library. Bootstrap is a bit of an odd duck. It's called a framework. And what's interesting about it is that it isn't just CSS. It includes a bunch of JavaScript files. Now, we're going to use this, even though we haven't really 100% learned JavaScript yet and learned like how it works inside the web page. Because all of that aspect of JavaScript is abstracted away from you. It's hidden away from you, and you just get to use Bootstrap per their documentation, and it works. Under the hood, there's lots of JavaScript stuff going on, but frankly, you hardly ever need to get into it. It just works. What we're going to talk about right now is how to take a page, just a standard page, and introduce this Bootstrap concept and library and framework into it. How does this work? So get some stuff out of the way here, and I'm going to share my screen again. So the first thing to know here is that, like I said, Twitter came up with this about almost 10 years ago now, maybe even longer than that, right? It's gone through a lot of different versions over the years, maintained by Twitter and then open source out into the world, which is really nice. And it's a combination, like I said, of a bunch of CSS styling rules and JavaScript to provide some cool functionality under the hood. But again, you don't really need to dive into the details of it, just learn how to use it. And it was put out there to help with a whole area of web development called responsive design. I'm sure you guys have encountered the term already. Is anybody gonna, can give me an explanation of what they think responsive design is all about?
Basically, it tailors to the type of screen or the size screen that you're using. On a smaller screen, a web page might do something, differently if it's designed responsively than it would if it wasn't.
Great description. Can anybody tell me about the term viewport? Has anybody heard that term?
Isn't that just like the type of screen?
Yeah. Go, Ellen, were you going to say something?
This is what you see when you display the size. So the viewport is like, regardless of the size of my window,
Yeah,
all I see is going to be the viewport.
it's the size of the visible display part of your device. That's exactly it. Okay. So you'll see that term viewport a lot. They don't use the word display size. They use viewport. Okay. So you're right on both counts. Both of you are. Here's the thing about Twitter and how it was designed. It was designed from a quote unquote mobile first design approach. In other words, they took the design decision that when you're creating a web interface, that you should think with what's it going to look like on that smaller form factor or viewport size, and then define what will change as the viewport gets bigger, all the way up to and including a full regular desktop display. So that fits right there in that responsive world, but it's just a little bit of a different think on it. Is from the beginning, let's think about what it looks like on a mobile device. Now, this was different than web development in general had as a strategy about 10 or 15 years ago, when the strategy was, oh, we've been making all these full-size large display web pages. Now let's see, how do we shrink them down to a mobile viewport size? And Twitter's approach, and therefore Bootstrap's approach, was no, let's think about from the beginning that you have a very limited real estate. But then if you're lucky, you get a larger and larger device, and you can make decisions about how you'll rearrange things as the size increases. It's just a philosophy. It's a viewpoint that's different. That's all. Okay. The other thing that the designers of Bootstrap had in mind was dealing with different compatibility issues in browsers. Have any of you ever had the experience where a web page behaves differently in one browser compared to another?
Yes.
Can anybody tell me, like, in general, the main reasons that that occurs?
Maybe some browsers don't support certain CSS functions or something.
Okay, good. Exactly. Why might they not do that?
I have no idea.
Okay. Anybody have an idea why a browser might not do that? Might not support, say, some new function or feature that comes into CSS and they don't support it?
Do they have their own CSS?
Nope. Because a browser, well, what do you mean by their own CSS?
The browser. It's certain styling that the browser.
Like they
develop.
want to do it a different. Let me clarify. CSS and how it works is not set by any one browser company. It's set by an independent third party. There's a separate group that lays down a specification for what CSS is supposed to look like when it's being implemented. They don't make browsers, this group. Same thing with HTML. The people that define how HTML works, they don't make browsers. Same thing with JavaScript. The people that define this computer language called JavaScript, they don't make browsers. All they can do is publish standards and say, if you were to design programs that would implement these things, this is what we say they should look like. Whether it's HTML or CSS or JavaScript. The people that come up with these things don't get to dictate. They have no legal standing to be able to enforce how any program actually implements them. Some of the reasons why an individual browser company might decide to do things differently are these. One, what if they don't have the money to pay for developers to add in some new feature that came into the language, HTML or CSS or JavaScript? They don't have the resources to be able to implement it. They're not going to do it. Two, what if in their viewpoint, one of these new features opens up a security vulnerability for their users? Until they've fully investigated it, they might not implement it. They might go, okay, it's fine for you designers to say that it's safe. We want to make sure. As we get later in our training, we'll discuss security vulnerabilities. And here's one of the big things that's super dangerous. On everybody's computer worldwide are one or more browsers. And inside the browser is an environment the computer programs can run in. And that's dangerous because the computer programs that get sent into that browser can come from anywhere in the world. And I don't know if you've noticed, but there's some people that have bad intent as regards computers out in the world. And so they can send computer programs to browsers all over the world that, unless the browser is really built well, can just open up the user to all kinds of dangerous things. We'll get into more detail on that later on. But another reason a particular browser company might make their browser so that it doesn't implement certain features in HTML or CSS or JavaScript is because they think it's unsafe. It's a higher risk factor. And there are other factors as well. Some of them are, they have proprietary things they want to do on their operating system, like Internet Explorer, for example, only worked for the longest time on Windows machines. And they were very opinionated about how they were going to do CSS, about how they were going to do JavaScript, and how about they were going to do HTML. And as a result, standard HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, some parts of it didn't work very well in Internet Explorer. And there's workarounds for all of it. But I just want to let you know that part of what the people behind Bootstrap were thinking with is we want to have the greatest degree of cross-browser compatibility. In other words, we're going to take it upon ourselves, we, meaning the Twitter developers, are going to take it upon ourselves to constantly pay attention to the major browsers and how they have decided to implement the features of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And we'll make sure that as those common browsers, the most popular ones, change, that we keep this Bootstrap framework working well. We'll take that on ourselves. Why? Because they were already doing it anyway. Because Bootstrap needed a really, really stable tool for this. So like, okay, we're going to be doing it anyway. Let's just let other people benefit from this work we're going to do. So that's part of why. Any questions about that? Okay. All right. So the last thing I want to mention is that when you're out there using Bootstrap, you're working on projects because you guys are going to work in technology. When you get your jobs and you're working in technology, you're going to find projects that use Bootstrap. The most common versions you'll see are versions 3, 4, and 5. 3 is pretty old and you won't see it very much. 4, you'll see a lot. And 5, you're seeing more and more of as time goes on. There's a big difference between 4 and 5. And the single biggest difference is that up through number 4, for handling some of the JavaScript things that Bootstrap needed to do, the developers at Twitter decided to use an extremely popular JavaScript library called jQuery. Anybody heard of jQuery before? jQuery is just it's a JavaScript library that makes it easier to do some web development things in JavaScript. It's got shorthand ways of doing stuff, and it's a pretty popular, like really popular library. But it's declined a lot in popularity over the last few years. And the decision was made by the folks at Twitter that in the most recent version of Bootstrap, they're not going to use jQuery as its third-party library, and they replaced all of what it was doing with just pure JavaScript inside their own code. So what this means is when you're going out there to learn Bootstrap, or when you're using it on the job, you're going to see 2 different primary versions of it. One that has all these references to jQuery and one that doesn't. What we're going to learn primarily is the modern way to do it without jQuery. So just to set the stage. All right, now, the most important thing is how do you actually get this Bootstrap stuff inside your code? So let's do that again. We're going to actually produce a new project to work on. So follow along with me and open up a new folder. And we're going to make a folder here called Bootstrap. And open that folder in Visual Studio Code. And then make yourself an index.html, same old deal. And then same thing we've done before. See how quickly you can do this. Give yourself a head and a body inside your HTML tag. Okay, now, there are 3 separate things that you need to include in your web page if you want to be able to use this Bootstrap framework. One is the actual CSS styles. The second is the JavaScript code that Bootstrap uses. And the third seems kind of odd, is a separate JavaScript library called Popper. Bootstrap decided that it does certain aspects of what it wants so well, they don't need to make them themselves. And we're going to use this third-party library called Popper. What it handles is hover over effects, tooltips, that kind of stuff. So you need to include those three things inside your page in order to use Bootstrap. Well, where do you include CSS styling references?
The head.
Okay, good. So let's get our head ready. First of all, we need to have a character set. And UTF-8 is what we'll choose. We need a title. Working with Bootstrap, we'll call it. And now we need, I'm going to put a little comment here. So what's that? There's a comment. Reference Bootstrap CSS. That's a comment. Now, how do you do that? There's two ways. The first one is to actually download the files, the CSS files, into your local project and link to them like you would your own CSS files. That's not the most common way to do it. The second way to do it, which is what we're going to use for right now, is instead to point to a location out on the internet where those CSS files are stored. Because Bootstrap does that for us. They just make those files available free to anybody sitting out there on a computer. They're technically part of what's called a CDN. Anybody know what CDN is?
Content delivery network.
Exactly, a content delivery network. What's a content delivery network? Can somebody describe that?
Just a website that hosts a bunch of a certain type of content.
Good, fair enough. Here's a little more precision on that. It's actually a collection of computers geographically distributed around the world, designed to host files that your users will need rapid access to. For example, what if there was one computer publicly available over the internet where you stored your CSS files for Bootstrap? Let's say your Twitter, and you put them on one computer. And let's say it's on the West Coast, maybe it's in California where Twitter is based. Everybody around the world would need to connect to that computer, grab a copy of those files, and bring them into their website. And that's fine if you're in the West Coast of America. It's a little tougher if you're on the East Coast because it takes a little longer to get the files. And if you're in Australia, you're in big trouble because it's going to take a long time for those files to ship around the world. And so a content delivery network is a company that just maintains a bunch of servers geographically distributed around the world with copies of all the files your users might need. And when they request them, the request gets routed to the computer that's closest to them. So they get the fastest delivery of the content that you need them to have. That's what a content delivery network is all about. Any questions on that concept? Okay, so two things. One, maybe Eric can learn how to spell working. There we go. And two, let's provide a reference to the content delivery network that hosts these files. So we need a link because we are going to point to somewhere else. Here's our link. And if we're going to link, we need a hyperlink reference. And the reference goes here. https:// and here's the URL, cdn.jsdeliver.net And then on there, it's a slash npm and slash bootstrap. Pay very close attention here. The @ is followed by the version 5.0.2. And then a distribution file or path. And then a CSS path. And then the actual file, bootstrap.min.css. We've now pointed to it. Now, I found that on another site. I don't know that by heart. So let's show you how to find out the current way to do that, because you're going to need to look it up a lot. What I would do is I go bootstrap 5 CDN link. Get bootstrap.com, introduction, bootstrap 5. Let's see. Yeah, okay, I like this. Get started, bootstrap. JS deliver. Copy and paste the style sheet link into your head before all other style sheets. Okay, I like this. I'm just going to copy it. Let me send you all this link. I'm going to put this in chat in Zoom. Everybody go there and just copy it. I would not ever have memorized this and type it out manually. I just want you to see how complex it is, but it's just a path to a file on a server. That's all it is. So once you've copied that, let's go in and let's replace that in our code. Let's just copy this whole link thing. Let's paste. And there's a whole bunch of information in there. What this will do is establish a link to grab that file. It'll use the file as a style sheet. And once we receive it, we have a little security thing we can do to check to see that the file arrived as expected. That's what this integrity thing is. We'll get into details on that much later in the training on what that is, okay? This is called a checksum, and it's used to make sure that the file arrived the way it was supposed to. All right, so now we've done one of three things. We've referenced the actual CSS. Any questions so far? Okay, well, we need to reference the actual JavaScript. So down towards the end of the body, let's reference our JavaScript. So comment just to show what we're going to be doing. So same thing. I want those from the CDN. I don't want to have to memorize all this. I just want to go grab them. So let's go back to that little site here. It says, why am I not finding it? There it is. Okay. So Bootstrap, many of our components require the use of JavaScript. They require our own JavaScript plugins and Popper, which is what I mentioned. So place one of the following scripts near the end of your pages right before the closing body tag. So bundle, let's do this bundle. Include every Bootstrap plugin, those are those built-in functions, and dependency, those are the other JavaScript files that Bootstrap uses. Include every single one of them with one of our two bundles. Look at these two bundles. I want to explain something. Bootstrap.bundle.js and bootstrap.bundle.min.js. Can anybody tell me what the difference is between those two things? Without even knowing what Bootstrap is. The only difference is this .min. Anybody know what that means? A minimized file is a file that's had carriage returns and unnecessary spaces taken out of it. So typically it's one single line of code, very, very, very long line of code. And it makes the file that you need to send much smaller. If it's not minimized, then it has the carriage returns and tabs and spaces that are there for readability. So that's what minimized is. So both of these different packages, the bundle or the minimized bundle, also include this third-party library called Popper. So let's go ahead and grab this right here. Script source, CDN, JSDeliver.net. So this is the JavaScript. So copy that. It's on the same page. And put it right down at the bottom, right above the bottom of the body tag. And we have now referenced all the JavaScript we need. I'm going to do view and then word wrap so I can read this a little more easily. So at this point, we have access to the three different things we need. One, we have access to all the CSS style rules that have been pre-made by the folks at Bootstrap. And two, we have access to all of the JavaScript that's needed by these built-in style rules. They're going to use JavaScript to do really cool, funky stuff on our pages for us. And we don't even need to know how it works, which is kind of cool. So we're set to start actually developing using this Bootstrap framework. Now, there's a lot to know about the Bootstrap framework, and we're going to do just the top level things to know about it, right? And then later on, when we're doing full stack development and building big projects, some of them will include Bootstrap, some will include Tailwind, and you'll get even more experience in it. For right now, I just want you to know the high levels. All right, so move my zoom controls around a little bit. The biggest concept to think with inside Bootstrap is that when you're using it to help control your layout and it's the responsiveness of your layout, all of your work is done inside a thing called a container, which should be familiar. Flexbox used containers as well, okay? There are certain systems inside Bootstrap that don't work without this container being present. So I'm going to discuss the basic operation of a container and of what's called a grid inside that container. And it's probably what we're going to have time to get through tonight, okay? Let's start with some content. We don't have any content here. Let's have a div here. And inside it will be an H1. Here is our heading. And inside it, we have a paragraph. Can anybody tell me what lorem ipsum is?
Filler text.
Filler text, good. So we're going to get some filler text here. Lorem ipsum generator, go ahead and Google that. And it's almost always the first result, loremipsum.io.
You can also in VS Code, you can type in like, say you want to do 40 words of lorem ipsum, you can just type in
What?
lorem 40, and you can also do like lorem star 40 and bring like a huge list. But yeah, you can do lorem 40 and yeah, just press 40 and yeah, enter. Yeah, there you go.
Shut your mouth. Okay, do that. Wow, Jason, you're awesome. I didn't know that.
I just learned
Yeah.
about it a couple weeks ago.
But can you do bacon ipsum?
Probably not. I've never heard of that before. That's a lot better.
Bacon ipsum, a meteor lorem ipsum generator. So paragraphs 5, all meat and filler. Give me bacon.
That's awesome.
I just think that's the best lorem ipsum generator in the world.
That's the most internet thing ever.
Okay, that's really cool though, man. Thank you. All right, so lorem 40, all one word, and it gave me 40 words of lorem ipsum. Dude, that was great. Okay, so let's make this div into our Bootstrap container. All you need to do is give it a class of container. And it'll start working. Everything inside here gets styled according to Bootstrap rules. Actually, hold on, take that away. Don't do it yet. I want you to see what it looks like without it. Look at that. I love this. It's trying to translate it. So look how boring it is, okay? Let's make this div into a container. Let's do the same thing. And look, already there's some styling going on. We've got padding on either side. And inside this container, we're going to start to apply rules to how things are laid out. Okay. And let's see how this responds to different size. That's nice. That looks good. Look at the readability. Oh, I want to show you one other thing. If you right click on here and go to inspect, there's a tool that you can use to see what your website looks like on different devices. There's a device toolbar. And you can change the dimensions right here. You can also pick different size devices, different common devices. And you can see what your website will look like on those mobile devices. That's just built into Google Chrome. I'm pretty sure a lot of the other browsers have stuff like that too. So I just want to show you that. And if you want to reset it, I think you go reset to defaults right here on the little 3 ellipses. Nope. I click on this again. There it is. Okay. Click on that icon again. There it is in mobile. And there it is without. So that can help you a lot. All right. Any questions so far? Okay. So there's another type of container. Let's go back to our code here. There's container, and then there's container fluid. This is built in to Bootstrap. And by the way, what this means is you can't use these classes for your own stuff. Any rules that you set for container or container fluid, they'll conflict with what Bootstrap is doing. All right, so let's do this container fluid, change that. And let's refresh here. And let's see what happens when it goes smaller. Notice we lost our padding. Slightly different. We'll probably need to have some more components before we see how that differs. Okay, good. Now, this is where we start to get into a little more fine control. What we're going to do is we're going to designate points at which the size of our viewport should control the appearance of what's on the screen. So let's do inside here 4 different divs. Give yourself 4 different divs in here.
I'm gonna blow your mind again. You can type in div *4. It'll do 4 divs for you and close them.
If I could hug you through the computer, I would. So div *4 like that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, consider yourself hugged. All right. Yeah, I hardly ever learned all those shortcuts for web stuff. That's excellent. I know a lot of them for React because I do a lot of React development. All right, so you get yourself 4 divs. And now we're going to start to clarify how they start to change as the viewport size changes. So there's some built-in classes here where you can make a container. Make sure you spell it right. And you define whether it's a small container. Make sure you're putting this stuff in the right place. A medium container. We'll put some content in here in a second, okay? Make sure you spell it right. I keep misspelling it. All right, now let's put some content inside here. 100% width until we hit, where's that table? 576 pixels. Copy that. Oh, wait, that says that's not 100. Copy that content here and put it in every one of these divs, and I'll give you the right data. This is from Twitter's documentation. So the medium will be 100% until we hit 768 pixels. A large is 992 pixels and 1200 pixels. All righty. So let me move everything away and let you see that. Go and type out what I have. Once you've got that in there, anybody still need that up there? All right, so let's go and see how that responds. Give ourselves a refresh. All right, now let's make this smaller. %, width. Oh, 100% width. What we're hitting is called breakpoints. Let's give ourselves some borders around this and see if we can see a little bit more about the size here. I'm going to make this div have a border. Let's just do a style right in the middle of it. And we'll go border. Actually, no. Let's be smarter about our CSS. Let's do a style rule here. I'm not sure if this is going to override anything. This will be fun. Everything I said we shouldn't do, let's do it right now. Actually, no. Why go off the reservation? Let's say bootstrap border around containers. Borders. Let's see what it says to do here. Bootstrap version 5.0. All right. Use border utilities to add or remove an element's borders. So let's do class equals border. All right, good. So on each of these, let's add a second class. See how that looks. All right. So now we got borders. Let me put that code back. Everybody needs me to pause. Go ahead and tell me. All right. Now let's start mucking with the size here. 100%. Let's go really small. And let's start slowly increasing the size. Now look what's happening right here. We're in between small and medium. And then let's go a little larger. And we're in between medium and large. Let's go a little bit larger. Now we're at the large spot. And then we're going to go past 1200 and they're all 100%.
That is so much better than a media query.
Yep.
Oh my God.
So Bootstrap just does all this behind the scenes for you. Okay. Now, see, it's 9:52 my time. All right. That's as much as we're going to go through. Okay. To say that we just touched the barest surface of what Bootstrap can do is an absolute understatement. What we're going to look at tomorrow is the primary tool that Bootstrap makes available to us, which is called the grid system. We have here now a container, and there's a way to set up your layout in a grid that has up to 12 columns wide and set rules for how it will scale and arrange itself as you have small, medium, large, and extra large viewports very simply and easily. And it works super smooth and it's pretty awesome. And that's what we're going to go into tomorrow. All right. We covered a fair bit. Anybody got any outstanding questions?
So tomorrow at 8.
Yeah, we're not gonna make that change until next week. Oh, wait. I said tomorrow. Wrong. Wednesday. We did Monday and Wednesday. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah, yep, you're right. We
Yep,
did.
thank you.
Last week we did Tuesday. That's
That
sorry.
was an exception because I had that horrific class.
Yeah, I got you.
And let me tell you, teaching a class from 8 at night to what ended up being 7 in the morning. Oh my God. I was a zombie. It was really bad. We got home. I often say stupid things around my wife. She knows this, but she just kept looking at me like, Eric, you need to go to bed, because the stuff that was coming out of my mouth made even less sense than normal. So thankfully, I don't have to do that anymore. My new role doesn't have those kind of crazy schedules. So thank you all for being understanding last week. No, it's Wednesday, 8 p.m. Pacific. And that's what I have for today. Questions, comments, anything? Okay, good. Awesome. All right, then we're going to end off. I will see you all in 2 days. If you want to do anything in those 2 days, start to look into the grid system on Bootstrap and see if you can redesign your page, your landing page. We're going to learn a lot more about it formally, but it's okay to dive into it a little bit and see what grid is. Now that you understand this basics of a container and these 4 different settings of width and the fact that they have different breakpoints where they transition, you can start to delve into grid and it'll go pretty well for you. Otherwise, if you're busy, don't want to get into it, just wait till Wednesday and we'll dive into it.
Do you need Bootstrap for grid?
For Dread?
For grid? Do you need
Yes.
Bootstrap for
Yeah.
grid?
Well, to be more precise, the Bootstrap grid system is a thing. There are other ways to do grids. There's lots of ways to do grids in HTML and CSS.
Yeah.
Okay. But when you see a reference to grid, most of the time it's referring to the grid system inside of HTML.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I was messing around with some grid after I was looking at Flexbox, and
Yeah.
I've never messed with Bootstrap or Tailwind or anything, so I didn't know if that was like just a thing for it. Anyway, it's
Yeah.
not important. We'll talk about
Totally
it Wednesday.
fine. Very cool. Anything else? Well, excellent. Good night or good morning, depending upon your case, and we'll see you in 2 days.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.